Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Letson, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time! Kaldheim is our first visit to the plane of the same name, but it connects to a part of the Magic story that goes all the way back to the game's earliest days. Make no mistake, there is a lot going on in this set, which features new and returning planeswalkers, and a massive supporting cast spread across 10 individual realms. Within the set, we can find 14 story spotlight cards, which are supposed to, well, tell the story of Kaldheim, but there were also several chapters published online for readers to enjoy as well. I am going to try to blend the two together and explain what happens on Kaldheim, but in the event of a mismatch, I will defer to the cards because this is a game first, and I believe that the playing pieces should carry more weight than something published online that the average player might never even see. The protagonist of our story is Kaya, a planeswalker who has come to Kaldheim under contract to hunt down and destroy a monster who has been threatening life on the plane. Kaya is a ghost assassin who typically gets hired to help ghosts move on in the same way an exorcist or Bill Murray would. This time, though, for whatever reason, she agreed to take a job hunting down a living creature, a job offered by a mysterious and unnamed benefactor, I should add. So this is what brings Kaya to Kaldheim, and it is as good of a place as any to stick our first story spotlight card, the World Tree. Kaldheim is a plane inspired by Norse mythology, and a major element of that is the presence of 9 individual realms connected through the branches of a great tree that they call Yggdrasil. The Magic version has 10 realms because that lets them each have a 2-color pair associated with them, but they are still all connected by one massive tree. The story also alludes to there being other realms beyond these 10, so a future visit to Kaldheim might have a slightly different setting. But for this trip, Kaya starts out in Bredegard, home to the humans. She is traveling with Inga Rune Eyes and the Omen Seekers, a group of human adventurers and explorers. They come to a small village that has stories of a monster killing its people, and they head into the nearby woods to investigate. The group finds a cave lined with mysterious metallic veins, even though this area should be nothing but barren rock. Dogged Pursuit is the story card for Kaya pressing deeper into this cave on the trail of her mystery monster, which we soon learn is actually Vorinclex. This is a character we have seen before, back on Mirrodin, or New Phyrexia, as it's known now. He's one of the Praetors, a group of legendary creatures who are the rulers of the Phyrexian forces. How he came to be on Kaldheim at this point is not explained, nor do we know who paid Kaya to hunt him down, or why. Fortunately, she does not waste time asking these questions, and instead gets right to work trying to kill him. We see this in Kaya's Onslaught, another story spotlight card, but what it does not show is that Vorinclex manages to escape after one of the Omen Seekers reveals themselves to be Alrund, god of the cosmos. Alrund is so disgusted by the creature he tries to isolate it behind a magical barrier, which prevents Kaya from being able to deliver her killing blow, and it gives Vorinclex a chance to flee by diving into one of the metal veins on the wall of the cave. This apparently lets him travel to another of the realms of Kaldheim, and so Kaya demands that Alrund help her resume the chase because it was his meddling that cost her the kill. Alrund offers up a boat that will take her to the next stop on her journey. The boat happens to be the Omen Keel, a legendary ship that belongs to Cosima, another of the plane's gods. So Kaya hops on the boat and is taken to Notvold, home of the trolls. She does not find Vorinclex, but instead finds the planeswalker Tibalt, disguised as the god Valky, speaking to a group of trolls. If only my high school English teacher could see the sentences I have to type now. Anyway, Tibalt is encouraging the trolls to attack the other realms when he gets interrupted by Kaya, so he tells them to attack her while he makes a run for it. Tibalt happens to have the Sword of the Realms, a weapon which can open pathways between the separate realms of Kaldheim, and this is a pretty big deal. The sword itself is forged out of Tyrite, a sort of magical sap produced by the World Tree, and its creation is important enough to be documented on a Story Spotlight card. Not only that, but we can see how Tibalt came into possession of this mighty weapon on another Story Spotlight card, the Trickster God's Heist. This saga tells the tale of Tibalt impersonating Valki and demanding the sword from Cole, its dwarven creator. After taking the sword, Tibalt kills Cole, and I think this is more of a larceny homicide than a heist, but maybe I need to watch Ocean's 11 again. Tibalt bounces out of there with that sword, and Kaya has to defend herself from the trolls, breaking her signature daggers on their tough flesh. She is rescued by an elf named Tyvar. Tyvar was following Tibalt, well, Valki, because he had just come talk to the elves and encouraged them to prepare for war against all of the other realms, and that made Tyvar suspicious. So he followed the God of Lies to the realm of the trolls, and that turned out to be really lucky for Kaya. Tyvar explains to her that he can move between realms quite easily, which catches Kaya off guard because she has needed a god's boat just to make it this far. She then recognizes that Tyvar has on him a trinket that came from Zendikar, so she realizes he's a planeswalker, although he doesn't know it himself. He has just assumed all these places he's visited were part of Kaldheim's World Tree, and not whole other planes. The two agree to work together to stop Tibalt and recover the sword, and so they follow his trail to Immersturm, home of the demons. Before we get there, though, I need to address another Story Spotlight card, which is Struggle for Skemfar. You see, Tyvar is no ordinary planeswalking elf. He is the younger brother of King Harold, leader of the elves here on Kaldheim. The elves were the original gods of the plane, and Harold has made it his personal quest to restore them to power, a goal Tibalt is able to prey upon by encouraging the king to fight for what he wants. Struggle for Skemfar seems to depict the brothers arguing about this issue, but we never see that happen in the written story. Likewise, King Harold's Revenge is another Spotlight card that does not seem to line up with what we are told happens, but we'll come back to that one later. So Kaya and Tyvar are chasing Tibalt into the realm of the demons. They fight a few demons together, and Tyvar uses his magic to create a new pair of axes for Kaya to replace her broken daggers. Together, they follow Tibalt up a mountain and defeat him. Well, as much as you can defeat a planeswalker anyway, because once he's dropped the sword, he just planeswalks out of there. This is told in the Story Spotlight saga, Fall of the Imposter, which shows our heroes climbing their way up the World Tree to reach the sword, while Tibalt falls to the bottom. Kaya and Tyvar do not have long to celebrate reclaiming the sword, though, because they soon discover Tibalt had already used it to open the Omen Paths, our next Story Spotlight card. An Omen Path is a sort of tunnel that connects realms together. Now, normally, it's really hard to pass between realms. I feel I have to make that clear, because otherwise, Tibalt going around poking all these holes isn't a big deal. But it is. It is. Tibalt has succeeded in connecting the realm of the demons to the realm of the humans, so Kaya and Tyvar still have some work to do, as Kaldheim is now experiencing Doomscar. That is another Story Spotlight card, and it shows us how traumatic it is when the realms come into direct contact with one another. Bredegard, home of the humans, is at the center of the conflict, and so begins the Battle for Bredegard, our next Story Spotlight card. Kaya and Tyvar meet up with several other legends, including Finn, Arnie, Inga, and Sigrid, to discuss how profoundly screwed they all are now that their realm is being invaded. Kaya points out that they at least do have the Sword of the Realms, and maybe we can do something with that. Sure enough, Alrind appears again out of a convenient shadowy corner and tells them, yeah, you just have to bring the sword to Halvar, the god it was made for, but he's already out there fighting because he's the god of battle, not the god of planning committees. Alrin supplies the group with some giant ravens, and they take flight, desperate to bring the sword to Halvar. And so our climactic finale begins. Halvar is standing on a bridge. Behind him is a village full of people, and in front of him are omen paths opened to pretty much all the rest of Kaldheim. We've got one going to the realm of the zombies, so that's Rise of the Dreadmarn, our next story spotlight card. Remember how Tibalt was impersonating Valki, the god of lies? Well, that's because the real Valki was in chains over in the zombie realm. Tibalt had captured him and gave him to Narfi, the zombie king over there, for safekeeping. Tibalt promised the zombies all the best treasure if they would just hold on to Valki and show up for the Doomscar, so they made up most of the threats in between Halvar and Kaya coming with his sword. Now we also have Invasion of the Giants, which I think implies both the Frost and Fire Giants were present here as well, but they are not mentioned in the story specifically. Varigoth, however, is mentioned specifically. He's a demon, and he knocks Kaya, Tyvar, and Arni off of their shared giant raven before they can reach Halvar. Kaya saves everyone by using her ghost form on them right as they hit a river at the edge of the battlefield. They claw their way back up onto the soil and are immediately confronted by two developments. One, the zombies are closing in on them, and two, the elves, led by King Harald, have also entered the fray. Arni says he can solo all of these zombies, and Tyvar says he can go explain Tibalt's trickery to Harald. That leaves Kaya to bring the sword to Halvar, who is still holding that bridge, armed with nothing but a wooden shield. Kaya presses forward before becoming surrounded by more zombies, including a giant zombie troll, when suddenly a dolphin leaps out of the river next to her and turns into a human before landing at her side. It's Cosima, who uses waves of water and her surprisingly long curved sword to push back the undead and give Kaya some space. The two continue to make their way towards Halvar before getting stopped again by Varigoth. This time the demon nearly kills them before they are rescued at the last moment by the elves, whom Tyvar has convinced to help. King Harald himself, riding a giant reindeer, saves Kaya from the demon and offers to carry her the rest of the way to Halvar. So she finally makes it over to the god of battle and gives him his sword. He says he can use it to fix everything, but he needs time. So Kaya and Harald take up positions to defend the bridge. It looks to be an impossible task as demons and zombies continue to pour out of the omen paths. Then the sky opens up and things get even more complicated. Overhead, Kaya sees Koma the Cosmos Serpent rip his way into Bredegard, and then watches as he dives into the portal from which all of the zombies had been entering. She then realizes Valkyries had been chasing Koma, so they enter the battlefield and start fighting the demons. This is the story spotlight card Starnheim Unleashed, and it represents the turning point in the battle for Bredegard. Mixed in with the Valkyries is Nico Eris, the set's other new planeswalker, who had their own side story on Kaldheim, but I will cover all of it in a future video. For now, we just need to wrap up this Doomscar. With the Valkyries entering the fight, and most of the zombies crushed under a giant serpent, everyone's able to buy Halvar the time he needs to operate the sword. He closes the open pathways, and the day is saved. All of the gods who had been present pretty much leave immediately, as if they had more important stuff to do than celebrate victory, but everyone else takes a moment to brag about how many bad guys they got to kill. The survivors agree that their work is not done though. There are still many threats within Bredegard, and it will take some time to track them all down and destroy them, even with the omen paths closed. Things are also a little tense with all the elves still around, because they might still want to try to reclaim their lost power, but it seems King Harald is going to wait on his revenge until a later time. Tyvar declares he wants to see planes beyond Kaldheim, and Kaya says, "Cool, I'll see you around the multiverse, because I still have a monster to hunt." Which brings us to the epilogue for the Kaldheim story. We're treated to one more scene in which we learn Vorinclex has found his way into the Tyrite Sanctum. Here, the god Asika prepares a special elixir out of the World Tree's sap, which grants her and her fellow gods immortality. Except Vorinclex is able to maul her to the edge of death and then collects a sample of the Cosmos Elixir before a portal opens and takes him back to New Phyrexia. So, just to recap everything for you here real quick, Kaya comes to Kaldheim to hunt a monster, who ends up being the Phyrexian praetor Vorinclex. He steals a sample of magical tree sap, while she is distracted by Tibalt, who has incited the various realms of Kaldheim to go to war with one another. Kaya, along with help from Tyvar, is able to defeat Tibalt and return the sword he stole to its rightful owner Halvar, who is then able to use it to stop the Doomscar and save the plane. That is what happens on Kaldheim, and I'll let you decide how well it's expressed through the story spotlight cards. With the summary complete, I can now open my own Omen path to a segment I call Mustache Minute. Ready? Here we go! Okay, so a lot of this story feels just a little bit off to me. Kaya is our protagonist, but she is like a C-string monster hunter at best. I am amazed that they didn't use Garrick here, especially because I had predicted Kaldheim was his home. Just to be clear though, we haven't seen anything that confirms it is not. Vivian would have also been a reasonable choice, but both her and Garrick were used in other sets within the past year, so I guess it had to be Kaya. When we last saw Kaya, she was helping Liliana Vess find peace after the events of War of the Spark. Kaya also has problems on her own home plane, and taking a contract on Kaldheim does not seem to get her any closer to resolving any of that. In fact, there is no mention in the story of Liliana, Teo, Rat, or the Gatewatch, of which Kaya is a member. On the one hand, this is good, because if you're new to the Magic story, you can get right into this one without feeling like you have to know a lot of what came before it. But it also makes this story feel disconnected from some of the larger threads, and for a game that's all about jumping from plane to plane, having such an isolated storyline seems weird. In the story, Tibalt admits to the reader that he came to Kaldheim intending to create a story to remember. He had heard about the sagas of the plane and wanted one bigger and better than all the rest. So he decides the best way to do this is to pit all of the realms against each other and cause a Doomscar. Not a great plan. If it works, everyone ends up dead and there's no one left to tell your saga, Tibalt. And if it doesn't work, you end up being the punchline again, just like you were back in your first appearance on Innistrad. There is one other bit I left out. Tibalt did encounter Vorinclex, apparently before Kaya arrived on the plane and the story really got started. Tibalt reveals that Vorinclex stuck him with a tricky poison or seed and would give Tibalt the cure if he helped first by creating a distraction. Tibalt was fine with this because he was there to cause mayhem anyway, but since he left the plane and Vorinclex went back to his own home, the two never crossed paths again. This could mean Tibalt is an infected Phyrexian agent running loose in the multiverse, which would be a huge deal, but we have no story spotlight card for it. Speaking of Vorinclex, it is never explicitly stated how he moves between Kaldheim and New Phyrexia. The most logical explanation is through use of the planar bridge, which is in possession of Tezzeret. The last time we saw him, though, he was scheming with Lazav over on Ravnica, so it seems like quite a leap for him to go to New Phyrexia and offer them his help, but maybe that is what happened. Whatever method Vorinclex did use to move between planes, it stripped him of all of his flesh and living tissue, leaving him a pile of metal and bone. A curious stag came over to sniff him out, and he was able to absorb it into himself, and from there, he kept consuming creatures to rebuild his form. This could have been our Kaldheim story, following Vorinclex as his power grows, as he moves from realm to realm, taking in bits from the various creature types found there, with Kaya hot on his trail the whole time. Perhaps that would have put too much focus on an outside character and robbed Kaldheim of its chance to make its own first impression. Instead, we got Tibalt causing general mischief. It feels like this could have been Oko, upsetting the natural order, impersonating somebody of authority. Okay, maybe that would have been too much like Eldraine. After War of the Spark, we were promised a sort of cooldown period, a time without massive plane-wide threat stories. No more Eldrazi invasions, no more Army of Eternals. Now we have the Age of Mystery. Who hired Kaya and why? Who was behind the Ozolith on Ikoria? Who is helping the Phyrexians move between worlds? These questions are fun to ponder in small batches, but when every event is overshadowed by a giant, you have to wait and see, makes me feel like the story team is kind of stringing me along here and maybe doesn't have a plan for how this all fits together. You know, it kind of feels like I'm watching Lost all over again. And speaking of being lost, we once more find ourselves with a storyline that doesn't include a lot of what we see in the set. Several of the gods are completely missing in action, especially the ones you figure would be there to fight alongside Halvar, like Toralf and Redain. There was also no mention of the shapeshifters, which actually could be a really neat twist if we later find out one of the characters we met was an imposter, but I don't know how they would reveal that to us before our next visit to Kaldheim, whenever that ends up happening. If you look at the art for Kaya's onslaught closely, it appears she is fighting Vorinclex near the Tyrite Sanctum, but in the story, the only time they cross paths is in the cave. So what happened here? One part of the story I did like. When Kaya and Tyvar catch up to Tibalt at the top of the mountain, he hits them with a smoke screen, and its magic causes an increase of self-doubt. So Kaya starts thinking she shouldn't be here, she's not cut out for this, and it looks like Tibalt's gonna win. But Tyvar is completely unaffected because he's so young and cocky, he has no self-doubt for the magical cloud to amplify. It's kind of funny. Oh, and when Cassima jumps out of the river and helps Kaya, Kaya says, "A badass sea goddess? Okay." And I like to think Thassa somehow heard that, and a little salty tear rolled down her cheek. Overall, the Kaldheim story felt epic, but hollow. It gave us 10 realms, but we never saw spirits, or giants, or shapeshifters, or even dwarves. The new characters show some promise. I'd like to do full videos on Tyvar and Nico Eris in the future, but Kaya felt like a square peg going into a round hole here, and Tibalt remains more of a joke than a real threat, Phyrexian infection notwithstanding. The story spotlight cards were overwhelming. There were more in this set than we've ever had before, but rather than tell a logical and complete story, it feels like they still left out important stuff to make room for the elf subplot that never really went anywhere. We've had gods before, on Theros and Amonkhet, but Norse gods are supposed to be the most human, the most relatable, and the most involved in life across the realms. But the Kaldheim gods felt aloof and indifferent. Halvar, the god of battle, was given a shield and a bridge to protect. We never really got to see him open up on those zombies. Redain, who is flavored as a protector, wasn't there at all. Neither was Egon, the god of death. It's a Doomscar, a plain-ending event, and the god of death wasn't present? I know I come across very critical of the Magic story, but that's because I love it and want to see it be as good as it can be. Creating a plane full of interesting characters and then giving them nothing to do feels wasteful to me. And I was really hoping things would be different in this post-War of the Spark era. Okay, I think my minute is up. Did you enjoy what happens on Kaldheim? Let me know down in the comments, and then make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya.